Hey everyone, Robyn Openshaw here. Remember this? Remember when this would take you out to dinner for you and your date, and you could leave a tip all for 20 bucks? That happened in our lifetime. Now I think of $20 as something that I use to leave a tip. Well, what's the big deal? Why are we talking about this? Can we go back to how this country started with a Boston Tea Party angry with England for high taxation? Nothing like the taxation we have now. It was just a tax on tea and not having representation here from the colonies in what is now called the US over in England. We fought a war over it. Well, that stuff's all gone now, but we had free markets and we had long period of time where there wasn't inflation. We've just accepted inflation and the fact that this 20 is now worthless, and we see it like we used to see a $5 bill. People my age. I turn 58 this month. So why would the inflation have me going deeper and deeper in Bitcoin to understand it, to feel comfortable enough to sink a lot of my net worth into it? It kind of starts with how a bunch of bankers got together in 1913 and they created the Federal Reserve. They went to a place not super far from me here in Florida, where I live. It was in Georgia, in a place called Jekyll Island. And they went anonymously. They tried to not have anybody recognize them because these were some of the wealthiest bankers. Well, they were the wealthiest bankers in the United States, in Europe. And they set up the Federal Reserve. And I don't know if they called it federal so that people would think that it's federal when it's actually not. It's a banking cartel. But they have influenced and set the rates for interest and done all kinds of shenanigans to put us in this headspace now where we think that this is money, even though it's backed by nothing. Until 1971, this was backed by gold in a vault, and France called our bluff because we owed them a whole bunch of money and they started to get nervous. And I can't remember if it was Mitterrand or who it was, said, I want to come over and get my gold and cash in the debt. And Nixon gave him gold on the ship that he sent over, but he owed him a whole lot more than that. And so basically, in a total desperation move, because we didn't have enough gold to pay off our debt and we were just banking on the fact that everybody wouldn't want to cash in their gold at once, fearing basically a run on the gold, Nixon detached the US dollar from gold. And so supposedly, even though nobody has audited it and gone in there to see how much gold we have at Fort Knox, supposedly we have a whole ton of gold there. Well, I'll do content, especially if you ask me in comments down below. I'll do more content on what I think the problems are with gold, especially gold versus Bitcoin. Because when you're looking for a store of value, you don't take your dollars into gold to see gold go through the roof. I mean, you can find people on YouTube who will say that gold's going to be worth $8,000 an ounce, and it might be. But my own personal experience with gold has caused me to cash out of it, and a bunch of other people are too. People who have been stacking gold for decades, and we now see Bitcoin as a better store of value. So listening to these little 15-minute videos that I do, I hope gets you thinking that we have not been backed by gold since 1971. Nixon told us that it was temporary. Okay, but I was 4 years old when that happened, and I just told you I'm turning 58. So obviously it wasn't particularly temporary since it's been going on for 54 years now. And all the way back to 1913, where basically our interest rates and a lot else in our economy is fixed by some elite bankers. They are not actually part of the federal government whatsoever. I saw a movie. It was by the heir of, it was, I think his last name is Gamble. And it was a documentary where he showed how the Federal Reserve was set up. And I was so gobsmacked by it. This is like 15 years ago. It was one of my biggest awakenings into how many scams we have all around us and how much we've been lied to. But the whole point of this documentary was to convince you that the money supply is rigged. They print money on demand. They create the inflation that they get us to believe is just part of life, and that our economy would crash if we didn't have like 2% inflation. Problem is, we don't have 2% inflation anymore. We have the highest inflation since COVID that we have had since the 1980s. And right now, this $20 bill seems like it's worth a lot less to you than it was just 5 years ago because we printed so much money. So, what's the big difference? If I have to boil it down, if I had a gun to my head and I had to tell you what's so great about Bitcoin versus the US dollar, it's that the US dollar is being printed, printed, printed. I'm not talking about necessarily on printing presses because most people are transacting digitally almost entirely. Most people aren't even using cash. They might have a little bit in their wallet and it might sit there in their wallet for a month because they're just using cards to do everything, or using Venmo, PayPal, Square, but they can print more money and create it and put it into the money supply. Whereas with Bitcoin, it's going to hit a wall at 21 million. So that gives it its value because it is a scarce, desirable asset. Okay, it wasn't so desirable when you had to talk people into it 10 years ago and 15 years ago when it was like the wild, wild west of Bitcoin. But now you've got a whole lot of companies doing a whole lot of innovating on top of this asset, Bitcoin, that huge companies are buying into and countries are buying into. Remains to be seen what Trump's going to do with it. At first, they were talking about a Bitcoin strategic stockpile. Then they went to Bitcoin strategic reserve. Now we're talking about having a sovereign wealth fund of which Bitcoin is part of it, as well as our gold. So all that has yet to shake out, but we might want to take a look at Bitcoin because the beauty of it is in its security, and there's a lot of things we could talk about it, but it's in the fact that there's 21 million, and in fact, several million have been lost because people didn't know what they had back when. And so even though those Bitcoin were mined, nobody's ever going to be able to recover them because it was just the Wild West. And, you know, like Alex Jones was given, I think, hundreds, maybe even thousands of Bitcoin when they were worth just pennies, and he lost them. I think he was given them by Max Kaiser, and he lost them because they didn't have value to him at the time. He didn't understand it. And of course, he didn't know where Bitcoin would go. So now the poor guy is like bankrupt and has been through hell the last few years. And if he had held that Bitcoin, he would be one of the richest people in America. So too bad, very sad for Alex Jones. But now that banks are getting involved and countries are getting involved, Bitcoin's getting expensive. And so it's just a matter of when you come in. You're going to come into Bitcoin. I'm just telling you, you're going to come into Bitcoin. There have been people that I've been trying to talk into coming into Bitcoin since back when I started at $8,000 a coin, who are just now starting to buy at $100,000. And that's okay because I still think that it's going to go a long way from here and people will be very happy that they bought at $100,000. But Michael Saylor's base case is $13 million Bitcoin by 2030. Okay, I have a more conservative base case than that. I think that that is extremely optimistic. That's his base case. He also has, I think, a $28 million Bitcoin as his bull case and a, I don't know, something lower, several $1,000,000 as his bear case, like his worst case scenario. So I think that Bitcoin's either going to go to zero, highly, highly, highly unlikely at this point, which is why I've gone in with more and have bought more Bitcoin, even as it's over $100,000. Or it's going to go to millions of dollars. And with all the innovation, all the interest by sovereign wealth funds and by countries and leaders of countries, and we've all just seen what El Salvador did. They paid off their national debt with the increased value of their Bitcoin because they bought 6,000 Bitcoin several years ago, and it went way up in value, and they sold enough to pay off their entire debt to the IMF, and then they bought 6,000 more Bitcoin. So we'll see if the US does it. If the US does it, it's just literally going to be dominoes falling. and you can get out in front of it, or you can just watch it happen and you'll still be broke and you'll wish that you had bought it, and you'll think of all your smart friends who told you that you should. And that's why we're out there talking to people about it, is because we don't want to ever be accused of, you had Bitcoin all these years and you didn't talk to me about it and you didn't explain it to me. We practically grab people at their cocktail party and try to tell them why we think is life-changing. We think people will be coming out of fiat currencies as they wake up to what a dreadful set of circumstances that we're in, where Trump is going to be forced to print more dollars than the last 5 presidents put together. Okay. You can come back in 4 years and say that this aged well or it didn't, but I predict he prints more money than Biden and COVID plus the last few presidents, including Obama printing $1 trillion to bail out the banks in the great financial crisis. I just don't see how we get through the next 4 years without printing like 20 trillion more dollars. So there's really no limit on how much they can print. We've all probably been to countries where one of our dollars is worth like a million of theirs. You can inflate your money for a really long time. So I'm not predicting the death of the dollar. I'm not predicting that the US government defaults on their payments to you if you have T-bills or bonds. That probably won't happen in my lifetime. However, there's a lot of hurt coming. And I think your best protection is in Bitcoin. So I'm just teaching you in these small videos because most of the crypto bros out there, they like forget how to talk to beginners. They forget to start at the beginning. So there's a lot of beginning points that I could start at, and there's a lot of points I can make about it, but I don't necessarily think that you're going to listen to a 2-hour podcast. So I'm doing short ones, and I'm doing them for Gen X and boomers and people for whom maybe this is really foreign. This whole concept is foreign. So the millennials, they're going to figure it out, except that the problem with the millennials is they're not really in plan for retirement mode yet. I wasn't thinking about that when I was in my 20s. So that's my whole shaking my kids, trying to get them to think about it, is just that they're 24 to 31 years old and they're not thinking that far down the road yet. And I'm saying, well, you should, because Bitcoin is your way to get the last laugh. Okay. Real estate, stock market, that's not going to be how you guys are on easy street when you retire. Okay. That's your parents and your grandparents. You're going to have to find a different way. And I think it's Bitcoin. So, should any of my children be listening, you just got a little mom lecture. Probably a whole bunch of other people are going to listen, though, whether they do or not. So, I'm doing a little bit of stockpiling for my children on their behalf so that when they wake up, um, they can buy it from me at the earlier price, because they're busy working a lot of hours and finishing college and stuff like that. So I don't want them to miss out on it. And I recommend you Gen Xers and boomers who can have a stockpile for your kids and then try to get them to wake up. Please send people to my channel so that they can, in bite-sized pieces, wake up about it, because I'm going to ignore all the jargon. Because if you go out there and start listening to stuff about crypto and get frustrated because you heard so much jargon and you heard a lot of words that you don't know, I just fought through it. I just sat there and Googled the words, and I was just determined I was going to learn this stuff. I can totally use the jargon. I can totally talk over your head about Bitcoin, but that's not my goal. I don't want to talk to the intermediates. I want to help bring people who have heard of it, maybe. They have friends who've made a whole ton of money in Bitcoin, maybe. Or, I've had people in my comments say, I don't even know what Bitcoin is. It is a store of value. It hasn't really gotten legs as far as being money that we use to exchange, probably mostly because the price has gone up, by like, it's grown by like 50 to 60% per year for 15 years straight now, that people want to hold it. Okay, that seems like a store of value. That doesn't seem like money that you want to spend when it's growing in value by 50 to 60% per year. So it's become more of a store of value so far than a medium of exchange. Okay, this is our medium of exchange, like it or not. So I keep some dollars around. I have a regular bank account. I do all the things with dollars, but more and more of my net worth is going into Bitcoin because it just seems like a very, very solid concept. Super hard to hack it. Okay, I know everybody's worried about the quantum computers, but you should be worried about them hacking your bank. Your bank was built most likely on a computer programming language called COBOL that was like from the 70s. In fact, they have to literally like go get the few old guys out there who still can even code in COBOL and put them on a helicopter and rush them in when they have a banking emergency, because our banking is so fragile and frail and outdated. I'm more worried about that, which would really affect our economy. I'm way more worried about that than that they can hack a 240,000 character Bitcoin wallet or link. So anyway, we'll talk more in the future, you guys. I've probably tested your patience by going a little bit long on this one, but that's why the $20 bill is worth less and less and less. You've seen it, even if you don't think about it that often. This $20 bill might be enough for a tip when you go out to dinner now. And it used to, in my lifetime, buy two people a pretty nice dinner and leave a tip. So some things to think about. And just remember, the Federal Reserve is as federal as Federal Express. And so you got to think about how you are going to preserve your store of value so that you have a good retirement and you have an off ramp when you don't want to work the 40, 50, 60 hour a week grind anymore. And I'll see you next time.